our AMA Ask Me Anything sessions. We're very pleased to have you join us today live. And for those of you watching the recording, we also invite you to view our other recordings that are on our channel, Growing by the Week. Today, I'm very pleased to announce my three colleagues joining me today. Jessica Bush from Tutor Doctor in North Jersey, Brendan Gallagher from Columbus, Ohio, Byron Zong from Albuquerque, New Mexico, covering the entire state of New Mexico. And I'm Chris Leon from the San Diego office of Tutor Doctor. So thank you very much again for joining us. And today's topic, the question comes up almost every time the three-letter acronym of SAT or ACT comes up: what's a good score? And like a lot of people will pick up Motor Trend magazine in the past and take a look at what's a great score for 0 to 60 miles per hour. You can't really do that with test scores per se. There are absolutes, and a lot of the Ivy League colleges have their very stringent standards and such, but the scores themselves can be relative to the student's own portfolio they will present for college admissions. Our aim today is to provide that information and to approach that so that you'll have something that you can take away and apply this to your own students' needs. So Jessica, I'd like to kick off that first question to you, if I may. Just that question as it was: what is a good SAT or ACT score?
Thanks, Chris. Hi, everyone. Nice to be here. So the question is, what is good? Right? So we'll go back to what is good. It's very relative to your students' goals. So that's why it's so important to get to know your student and get to know what their college goals are. So when you have a consultation with a test prep student, you need to really deep dive and look at their classes. You need to look at what they're taking. You need to look at the rigor, and you need to find out, do they have a plan? Do they know what colleges they're looking at? And then you can kind of get an idea of what is good for them. But then you also have to look at their practice tests and say, okay, relative to the schools they want to go to, where are we at with their scores? And, you know, based on the national average right now, which somebody else can talk about what that is.
Yeah. So the other side of that, then, Brendan, if I can ask you this question, since I know you've got two sons that have gone through this whole process. So we were talking, the question to Jessica was, what is a good score? I'm going to ask you the less polite question: what's not a good score? Is there anything as such as a bad SAT or ACT score?
Well, again, I'm glad to be here as well with the group. You know, I think it's almost as subjective as what good is. You know, I hate to say that there is any such thing as a bad score. Of course, you know, again, depending on the student, depending on the situation, some of it is relative. They may have very high expectations, and you know, even a high score that doesn't meet those expectations or help them along that path could be considered bad. The great thing is that you, as I've learned, you have time to get ahead of that. You can take the test multiple times. The nice thing is both are offered multiple times. So there is never, it's never kind of a do or die situation. And, you know, there's ways to obviously prepare for that, you know, to make sure you maximize it.
Yeah, and that's a really good question or point you raised. So does that mean that a student can take an SAT or ACT more than once?
Absolutely. In my personal case, I've had each has one SAT under their belt, and each of them, I think altogether, have 5 ACT tests that they've taken in total.
Interesting. So Byron, how does one choose? Do you do both? Or do you just pick one and, you know, put all the eggs in that one basket? How does somebody choose whether the SAT or ACT or both is really in their best interest?
Well, I'll answer that question as best I can in a moment, but I want to go back to your previous question. You know, the bad score is the score that doesn't get you where you want to be, right? And in most cases, that's happening because a student hasn't properly prepared and properly planned. And so they've underestimated. All too often, what I see is this what do you call this herding mentality, right? The school is offering the PSAT, you know, in their junior year, they're offering the SAT in their senior year, and we get in line, we check that box, and we call it good. That's happening way too often, and what's happening is it's not really preparing students for what their potential is, or what they would have accomplished if they had planned and prepared properly. You know, so just keep in mind, I would say avoid that herd mentality and reach out to somebody who's a professional, your college counselor, somebody like a tutor doctor office who can actually coach and advise and counsel you on all the many things that need to be done, of which a score on an SAT or an ACT is just one, you know, but you want to be able to put your best foot forward everywhere. So back to your other question then here, SAT, ACT, you know, again, it does come down to the student and their goals. But what I'm always doing here in my office is that I want to do everything that I can to help my student be differentiated from another student who may be applying for the same program at the same school. Okay, so if both of those students, all things being equal, and they both scored the same on the SAT and it's a good score, but my student also has a good ACT score, that's just a small thing that could differentiate him in the eyes of an admissions officer to say, wow, this student went the extra mile here. And they also, it wasn't required of them, wasn't asked of them, but it's demonstrating that leadership, it's demonstrating that initiative. And those are qualities that they're looking at, not just a test score, but taking that second test or that other ACT or SAT can make the difference.
Right, absolutely. And we'll come to Jessica in a moment for more of the information about how does somebody research what is a good score, and you know, the different tranches of scores that apply for, say, the Ivy Leagues and the elite state universities and then others. But the one thing that we've seen from time to time is that a student will enter the test preparation process, take a practice test. Really, that's really the gateway into the whole process, is try a free practice test and see where the student scores. And I don't know about your experience for the others on the call, but so many times we'll have a student that will come in with a stellar GPA and take a practice SAT or ACT, and that initial score will be way lower than anyone in the family would have expected. And several times we'll be asked, did you score it against the right answer key? So, well, yes, we did. And it's just, we've seen that nationwide, the trend in scores has been downward for the past several years. And in fact, last October, ACT announced that for the first time since 1991, the nationwide average score had fallen beneath 20 points out of a possible 36. The SAT is also trending downward. There's a range of reasons why that can be the case, or are suspected to be. But as Byron said, it's just one element of the overall portfolio. But there is a trend. There are a number of universities that are beginning to require the exams again, or their actions in terms of who's admitted and who isn't prove that those who admit competitive scores tend to be admitted, whereas those who don't submit scores are tending to be not admitted. So there is sort of a silent requirement, if you will, in some areas. So Jessica, the question comes back to you. How can someone determine, you know, what tools, what websites are out there, what resources might they have from their schools, in fact, to help determine what their target score might be?
I'm going to answer that quickly because we do have some questions as well that we want to answer. We typically say that the student needs to research, right? So start a spreadsheet with each college you're interested in. Go on and Google the website and say freshman college admissions requirements, and see what each school actually is listing as a requirement. But do a deep dive into, if your student is doing pre-med or engineering or health sciences or PTOT, a lot of times they have a different requirement than just the general ed, the general admissions. So you need to really take a deep dive at every single school and look. But I want to put one of the question out there that we have. If a score isn't good enough, should it be left off the the application or the admissions, or is a missing score worse? Somebody
I'm
want to take
curious-
that one?
I'm curious for Chris, what you would have to say to that.
I
Well,
know,
I would go
I
back
know
to
what
what
I
was
would
said earlier.
advise somebody.
Which, the definition of good enough, right? Which both Jessica and Brendan were looking at. Again, it goes to what Jessica was saying. I know, there's the common data set, and there's also the website Naviance, which a lot of schools do provide big data for college admissions. And so if you take a look at that, or the school's website, look at last year's admitted freshmen average SAT or ACT scores for the major and in the university you're going to. If you're at that level, submit. Even if you're a little bit beneath that, and you've got a decent GPA, submit.
You can
way
always
below it,
resubmit. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
You
So
can take
that's
it again
really
and
sort of your
replace
first
it.
standing point. What was last year's admitted freshman average?
There's another question. Does a score target change based on in-state, out-of-state, or international students?
All of the above. It varies by school, by state. I can speak to my own in the state of Ohio. A lot of schools, as Chris has mentioned, Chris in California has seen much more of this, but a lot of schools, they haven't gone test blind, but they've gone test optional. My older son, there was very clear parameters as if you got this score, you get this much money, that was kind of laid out. My younger son going to school now, most of the schools in the state did not have any requirement. Now they did, as to your point, it goes to an overall portfolio. Their grade point average, their ACT or SAT scores, their activities. I mean, it's a long list of admissions, requirements or hurdles that they need to jump over. But I can tell you it was very different where my younger son ended up going in West Virginia, where based on his ACT score and his GPA, it was very, let's put it, very tied to how much money that you received for it. So just those two states alone, two different schools, both public universities. And by the way,
Very
West
different.
Virginia borders us. He lives about a half an hour from Ohio, and it is 100% different. So it really does depend on, what state. And I haven't had any, maybe someone else on the call has had exposure for international. I have not.
We have another question. My state requires the SAT. If my son is interested in pre-med, would it be wise to also take the ACT if applying to schools in the Midwest?
Well, if I were to
Again.
answer that question, I would say yes, it would be, right?
It would be, yeah.
So
Absolutely.
if he's going into a medical program, more science, and math that the ACT, offers is going to be a more meaningful, relevant score to the school. But definitely check with the school and the program that you're going to. But
Yep.
in general, I would say absolutely yes.
Same.
And one thing I'd add too is take a look at what the numbers are, particularly pre-med. It can be very much a numbers game, and before COVID certainly had been. You can take a look at, most rule of thumb is you'd want to score certainly in the upper 1400s, if not 1500s and above, to get into some of the really elite programs around the nation and Ivy League colleges. Engineering, right? Your top majors are, pre-med, engineering, computer science. Those are going to be the most rigorous areas, and if they're not test blind, they will expect higher test scores.
Yep.
Great.
Those
And
are our
I would-
questions so far.
if
Oh, and
there's-
the other thing is you need to look at your state and make sure, because certain states, I know Connecticut, not New Jersey changed it, that SAT is a requirement for graduation. If you don't get a certain score on the SAT, you can't graduate. So that's heavy duty. You need to know your state's graduation requirements.
Yeah.
That's another key point.
And it's, go ahead, Byron. I'm sorry.
No, so I wanted to interject on Jessica's point earlier about, checking with the school and the admissions, requirements and standards that they have. Another thing to be asking for relative to the score is what are their scholarship award, requirements or expectations and standards, right? So get that information too, because you don't want to have a good score that's less than, right? To meet those, because many of us are doing this because we're hoping to get an award.
Yeah, I want to bring up something that happened to me a couple months ago when we started test prep with one student. I'd never had this before. A student took an SAT and got an 880. Yeah. So when you see a score like that, I sat with the student and I said, tell me how you took this test. Did you take this test seriously at all? Or did you literally guess the whole test? Because to get something that low, literally, and he didn't try. So I said, I want you to take a practice test and I want you to actually try. Give it your best shot, cold, blind. And let's see a real baseline of where you're at, because an 880 or a 900, many times, yeah. So when you have a kid, and I had a number of them that came in the 900s when we first started, you have to be really honest and manage the parents' expectations and say, even with prep, even if we prepped that student for 30 plus hours, how high of a score are we going to get? The student has to really, really work hard and put his or her mind to it. And we have to really focus on a plan and practice tests and homeworks and all of that to get a score that is going to be even in 1100 if we're lucky, right?
And that goes back to that earlier question, that sort of the start of the process, right? Taking the practice test. Jessica, since you were just on that topic, and certainly I'd like to hear what Byron and Brendan would add as well. What would be sort of the minimum, if you will? Is there a threshold for the SAT or ACT incoming practice test beneath which the student would be better off doing pre-prep, if you will?
What do you mean pre-prep?
Meaning, if it turns out, say a student takes the initial practice test and scores an 880 on the SAT, should he do a test preparation program, or might there be enough issues maybe in the study habits or underlying subject matter that he should maybe try again? And I mean, like 1,000, 1,100, what would you set as sort of the bar beneath which it doesn't make sense to do test prep?
That's a very good question, because I've advised families not to invest in test prep. I know that there's some of us, like Jen Rozier would say, definitely you can try and do the test prep, but the student needs to be motivated and needs to work hard. We need to have the students buy in order to get their scores increased. We can't just wave a magic wand. And I tell families, it's not about waving a magic wand and having a test prep tutor and all of a sudden, poof, your scores go up. That's not how it works. Right. We have to dedicate our time as tutors, and the student has to dedicate their time to really, really work at it. So that's a very good question.
One of
in
the
my area, I would say I wouldn't. If someone was in the thousands or the national average, I would say it's worthwhile.
Yeah. That 900,000 mark is one of those, it's kind of like this tipping point. And it really comes down to that, again, the student. And this is the beauty of being able to work with a local professional like a Tutor Doctor office, right? When we can sit down, we can consult with you, we're going to get to know you as the student, not just your goals and your scores and all those types of things that are important, but who are you and what can we learn about your actual skill set? So I just had a consultation a half hour ago, and I'm talking with a student who's very bright but disinterested, so there's lots of potential, but it also became very, very evident that his academic, his study skills and those important executive function habits were not well established, right? And if there's a foundation like that, that's really creaky and you can actually build that up, they're going to be able to demonstrate the potential that they really are. in a more
100%.
significant way than spending, X amount of dollars on a test prep program that wouldn't have been as beneficial.
100%. I'm with you all the way.
And Byron, to your point about the local, that's important because each school, a lot of this goes back to honestly the rigor of what they have in their academic career and life in the school system that they're in. Unfortunately, not all of the schools that our students attend are created equal.
Yeah.
And
Sure.
I've had the same tutor do the same number of hours with two different students that should pretty much have the same curriculum within the state of Ohio, and two very different outcomes because they had not progressed at the same pace or the same level because of the rigor within each of the schools. So again, that's the importance of that local knowledge and being able to really, get to know the student at that, much better level.
We have one more
Brendan,
question.
let me add one thing to Brendan. In fact, with what you said, we've actually in my San Diego office, we've had at least two, if not three different sets of twins within the same family.
Yeah.
And in fact, it has been three. In two of those situations, they had similar GPAs, went to the same school, but they had quite different SAT scores. One was stronger in English, the other was solid more in math. We had one other set of twins that they did the ACT, and same thing. One was stronger in the reading writing, the other was stronger in the science and math. And so you can even see individual, same school, same family, same house, but individual variance there. And that's why it is such an individualized thing, as Byron had said earlier on.
Yep.
So here's our one last question. This is a good one. How are colleges going to evaluate 2024 freshmen with some SAT and some DSAT scores being submitted? Do we know yet?
Boy.
Good one.
We are learning a lot about the changes, and there's a lot of unanswered questions. I don't have an answer to that question. Maybe you guys do, but are they going to weight it because they're seeing preliminary results, at least at this point, are showing that the DSAT scores are lower? I don't know. There's so many variables.
I was on a panel, an industry panel, just in fact, before we started this live today. And it was interesting because there's still sort of a hemming and hawing and that sort of thing out there. But if it's anything like the 2015-2016 SAT transition that many of us lived through, there'll be a little bit of a wait and see attitude. I mean, a lot of people really like on the surface the idea of the new SAT. It's shorter, fewer questions and all this. But as you said, Byron, we have seen some differences in the scores reporting that's coming out in these official pilot programs that College Board even ran. So that's why sort of advice, if we can sort of, as we reach to a close here shortly, what is the advice? Well, if you're a junior and you have completed Algebra 2 or you're near completion, and you could consider taking the SAT that exists today. Many of those test sites are full. In many cities, like in San Diego, you can't get in to a test site in this city until December, and even that they're filling up. You have to go out of town 200 miles. The ACT sites are not as full, but they're getting full. So if you're a junior, don't delay, jump into it now. If you're a sophomore or younger, the only thing you will know is the digital SAT or the ACT. The paper SAT goes away after this December. So that's what we've heard, is that there will be, the colleges will accept them. There might be a little bit of an asterisk next to it, but they will accept them, same 1,600 point scale, and they will look at it as equivalent to the paper one.
All right. I think that we've covered a lot of great questions.
Yeah. Are there any other burning questions, Jessica, that we've received from the public?
No,
okay.
I think we've covered them all.
Hey, I thought it might be a little bit useful. At one point in the conversation, I thought about this, particularly with regard to the ACT, which had a lot more experience with, the concept of super scoring. And I think it's important to know when you say what's good, what's bad. Sometimes a student, like we've talked about, struggles in one area. They're really good in math and science, but they struggle in English and reading. Or they do good in English and reading and not so good in the other. The nice thing, a lot of schools, not all of them, but a lot of them will accept what's called a super score. So if they take the test twice or 3 times, they essentially take their best score in each of the 4 sections and that becomes their overall super score. So it really does allow them in some of those doing test prep and tutoring, they can focus in on some of those things rather than covering the whole spectrum. They might do some review in the areas they're good at and really jump into the areas that they're not so good at. So you can get that super score up, which can, really help them, achieve whatever goal it is that they have. It's not just a one and done type thing. So I just figured that was worth mentioning.
So that person did not follow the herd mentality, right? They didn't
Correct.
just do, get in line, check that box and call it good, right? They put a plan together, they worked a plan, and that's going to position them better, absolutely.
And the last thing I'll say from my own experience, again, my younger son who just dropped him off at school on Friday, he was able to improve his ACT score by 1 point, and he actually took the test after he had graduated high school. The school he went to, it would accept that score all the way up until he arrived at school. So just to throw it out there as it's never too late kind of a concept. You figure you have a senior, it's already too late. I'm behind it's not. I can tell you it is not, and it is well worth the time and effort. I can guarantee you.
Again, it depends on the school. You have to know the schools and the rules. Yeah.
And Brendan, back to your earlier point, you brought up a very good point that, and Jessica as well. Much of the time that is stated on the school's public website. I know here in San Diego, University of San Diego, Point Loma Nazarene University, it's right there on their admissions page. You have this GPA, this SAT score or ACT, you get X amount. This higher GPA and this higher SAT score, now you get the next level of award, and it can be significant. That's why through the years, we've had people that have already been admitted into one of the colleges, and then word has gotten out about our program. They've contacted us and did a second tour of duty through test prep to goose up their score, either to super score, as you said, Brendan, or to be able to achieve the scholarship amounts that are out there. So test prep can be strategized in many different ways. And as Byron just said, it needs to have a plan. So for anyone who's watching this right now or by recording, if you'd like to understand a little bit more what a test prep plan might look like, how does it get individualized? How do you get out of the rat race? How do you get out of the urban mythology rumor mill out there? Well, we strongly recommend, feel free to give us at Tutor Doctor a call. Any of the Tutor Doctor offices, you'll see that on our YouTube page where all of the offices are listed. You also can reach us by our toll-free number, which is 1-888-4-TUTORS or 1-888-488-8677. And you can call that day or night, and you can ask and say you're located in whatever city you are, and they will connect you with the nearest Tutor Doctor office.
Sorry, Chris, is it 1-800 or 1-888?
800.
It's 1-800.
I am so sorry about that. Thank you.
Sorry, I didn't
Otherwise, who knows who you would call?
I don't know who they were going to get a hold of, but
it is. Sorry. Yes, our main website is AAA. But thank you for Tutor Doctor. It is 1-800-4-TUTORS, 1-800-488-8677. So that shows even if you have gone through a test prep program, you might get a telephone number wrong. So always do check your research. Thank you for joining us here today at Tutor Doctor. We look forward to seeing you next time when you can ask us anything. Have a good day.